Hey there, welcome back to the Bomberman Retrospective. If you missed the last episode, we went over the original PC games that started the series. This time around, we're going to be looking at the NES game that most people think actually started the franchise. New format from this video onwards. I couldn't incorporate it in the last video because those games didn't really fit the mold for this setup. So basically, we're going to go over the development first, then the gameplay, then the music, and then the legacy section, which is going to go over the reception of the game at the time and the impact that it left on the franchise. So without further ado, let's get into it. In 1980, Hudson Soft developed a new compiler for video game development. To show it off, they wrote a simple game which would end up being the original PC versions of Bomberman. 3 years later, Shinichi Nakamoto was looking through the old library in order to make a new game. While doing so, he rediscovered Bomberman, and in the span of about 3 days, not only did he port the original game, but he also redesigned it. He took inspiration from shooting games that were popular at the time, and the power-ups even were sourced from Hudson Soft's own ports of Star Force. To make the game's art style stand out from other games, he decided to make the enemies cute rather than intimidating, and instead of having only one enemy, the balloon type enemies, he added 7 more. The last thing he changed was Bomberman's design itself. He felt the design was uninspired, describing it as just being a middle-aged man in a hat. So he repurposed an enemy sprite from the NES version of Lode Runner, which isn't the only connection that these two games have with each other, but we'll get into that later. Even though this isn't the first game in the franchise like many assume, and it's technically an enhanced port of the PC game, Nakamoto himself sees it as the only true version of the first title, and I don't blame him. The Famicom version of the game has more substance to it than the PC versions ever could. But of course, that leads us directly into the next section. While changes to the gameplay were made, the basic elements of it stayed the same. You're still dropped down in a maze with indestructible walls and destructible walls filled with enemies that you need to defeat in order to continue on. However, instead of only having to defeat the enemies in order to carry on in this game, you have to both defeat the enemies and find the exit. And this increases the difficulty of the game because along with the new wide open spaces, we now have a time limit. If you can't make it to the exit within the time limit, then it's an instant death. That may make you think that finding the exit first would be the best strategy, but that could potentially make it harder for yourself, because if you blow up the exit at any point, it causes more enemies to spawn. For me at least, these enemies are damn near unbeatable, so once I blow up the exit, it's always an instant lose. Also new to the game is the series staple of power-ups. This includes Bomb Up, a power-up that increases the amount of bombs you can place at one time, Fire Up, which increases your bomb radius, Speed Up, which increases your what feels very slow walking speed, Remote Control, which allows you to detonate the bombs manually, Wall Pass, which allows you to pass through walls, Bomb Pass that lets you pass through the bombs, Fire Pass, which allows you to walk into the explosion, and the Question Mark, which makes you invincible for 30 seconds. And there are also bonus power-ups that can show up under certain circumstances. Although they don't give you the ability to do anything new, they just give you extra points. These power-ups do make the game a lot easier when it comes to the later levels, but in the beginning, the game can actually be quite difficult. In the beginning, you can only drop one bomb at a time, and you're incredibly slow. I don't know if I've been spoiled by the other games in the series, but at the beginning of this game, Bomberman just seems entirely too slow. And since this game only has one power-up per stage, that makes it less likely that you'll get a speed up. The slowness of the player combined with the quickness of the enemies and the time limit makes me not surprised at all that I could never make it past the first level as a kid. I wouldn't say it's poorly designed, it's just hard for me to get used to. And once I did get used to it, the gameplay was just as addicting as it always is. It just falls into the trappings that most first games do. Much like going from Super Mario World to Super Mario Bros. Or from Sonic Mania to Sonic 1, the later games are just better. That doesn't mean that the first game is designed poorly or even that the first game is bad. It just means that as the series went on, the gameplay evolved. I still think that this game is very fun and addicting. You just have to get into the right mindset to play it. Or use save states, that's also an option. I forgot to mention this in the original recording, but every 5 stages you reach a bonus stage where you're completely invincible, and the main goal is to defeat as many enemies as you can before the time runs out so you can rack up extra points. Like most games of this time, the box art was changed from the Famicom to the NES, although neither of the box arts are a good representation of what the game actually looks like. Both games use wildly different robot designs from what is used in-game and what would become the design that we all know and love. The Japanese version of the manual states that Bomberman was Lode Runner before he was Lode Runner, making yet another connection between the two games. The manual then goes on to state that Bomberman was created for the production of bombs and was put to work by evil forces. One day he heard a rumor that if any robot managed to reach the surface they would become human. That inspires him to make his great escape, but in doing so, he alerts whatever forces created him and they send enemies after him in droves. The ending of the game actually does have a short clip where you see the Bomberman sprite transform into Lode Runner, and the text actually explicitly states that that's what's happening. The NES version would remove any explicit reference to Lode Runner, and the text that explicitly stated that Bomberman transformed into Lode Runner was changed to say that you might recognize him in one of our other games. Obviously, this is way different from anything you'd come to expect from the series. The story has a darker spin to it that wouldn't be tried again until Act 0, and by the next game, the connections to Lode Runner were immediately dropped. This story actually seems like it would be more fitting for the designs that are on the box art of the game. Unlike the last two games, instead of just being silent, this one actually features music composed by Jun Shikuma, who would go on to make even more music for the Bomberman series. The basic looping track during gameplay would go on to be remixed and restyled in many different games as the series went on. You'd think that this loop would get annoying after a while, but for some reason it doesn't. There's something so undeniably catchy about it. No matter how many times it loops over and over again, I never get tired of hearing it. In this game, it's in its most basic state, just the same 7-second loop over and over again. Later games will go on to add to it and make the song more complex or add their own stylings to it, but still keeping the catchiness of the original song. The same can be said for the other two themes you'll be hearing a lot in this game, the power-up music and the bonus stage music. Both of these themes are also just as catchy, and the bonus stage music would later go on to be used as the multiplayer theme for many of the games throughout the franchise. The title screen music is also incredibly catchy. It really goes to show how good of a composer Jun Shikuma is, because she can take such simple compositions and make them so memorable. There are many other games at the time that had music that was either unmemorable or annoying, and her talent really shines through when not only are these tracks memorable, but not agonizing to listen to. The game was released on the Famicom in 1985 and in the NES in 1987. It would then go on to sell 1 million copies, resulting in the series as we know it today. While the story aspects of this game would be dropped later on, damn near everything else about this game is where some of the most iconic elements of the series originate from. Whether it be Bomberman's trademark design, the enemy behavior, and the music that's most associated with the franchise, it's easy to see why people think that this game is the one that started it all, and not the original PC one. Unlike the PC game, this one would go on to be ported to many different consoles and even remade. The first port was actually back to the PC on the MSX as Bomberman Special. Then it was ported to the Game Boy in the Game B mode of Bomber Boy, also known as Atomic Punk in the US and Dynablaster in the UK. It was then given a loose reimagining on the PC engine, also known as the TurboGrafx 16, which expanded on the gameplay, adding bosses and adding the trademark multiplayer. A full-on remake as Bomberman Party Edition on the PS1, which featured both a mode with enhanced graphics and a mode with the original 8-bit graphics, and it was ported to the Game Boy Advance as a part of the NES Classic series. That version was actually my introduction to the franchise. I can still remember the times when I would take my sister's Game Boy SP when she was gone just to play this game. And until Super Bomberman R, this game and Hero were the only Bomberman games I'd ever played, and along with Mega and Wario Blast were the only two I even knew existed. The legacy that this game left behind is long and illustrious, and even though like most games from around that time it's aged and the later games that came from the series are better, I feel like under the right circumstances it could still be enjoyed today.